Lisbon, Portugal, October 1941, and a short Spanish man with wire-rimmed glasses sits in his hotel room at the Palacio, staring at a bottle that might as well contain liquid magic. The bottle, given to him by German intelligence officer Friedrich Knapperath just 3 days earlier, contains what the Abwehr calls invisible ink, a chemical solution that allows messages to disappear from paper, only to reappear when treated with the proper developer. Juan Pujol Garcia, the man holding this bottle, understands that he possesses something more valuable than gold, more powerful than any weapon he could carry. He holds the key to a secret communication channel with Nazi Germany, a channel he intends to turn into the most elaborate deception operation in the history of warfare. What neither Pujol nor his German handlers can possibly know is that this innocent-looking bottle of chemicals will become part of a chain of events that will save thousands of Allied lives on the beaches of Normandy and change the outcome of World War II. The invisible ink in that bottle represents centuries of scientific development, from ancient Greek philosophers experimenting with plant extracts to modern chemists creating compounds that could withstand the scrutiny of trained counterintelligence experts. And the story of how this technology influenced the greatest military operation ever attempted reveals a hidden dimension of warfare, where chemistry and espionage intersect to produce results more decisive than any battle. The science of invisible ink stretches back more than 2,000 years, to a time when concealing messages could mean the difference between victory and defeat in ancient wars. Philo of Byzantium around 217 BC discovered that writing with a solution made from oak galls would remain invisible until treated with vitriol, creating a chemical reaction that caused the hidden text to appear in dark letters. The Greeks and Romans understood that certain plant juices, when applied to paper or parchment, would leave no visible trace until heated or treated with specific chemicals, giving military commanders the ability to send messages that appeared to be blank sheets of paper to anyone who intercepted them. By the Renaissance, invisible ink had become sophisticated enough that statesmen and diplomats used it regularly in their correspondence, and Giovanni Battista della Porta published the first comprehensive book on secret writing in 1558, detailing dozens of formulas for synthetic inks derived from natural substances. The most famous recipe involved alum and vinegar, a mixture so effective that it remained in use for nearly 3 centuries. During the American Revolution, George Washington financed a secret laboratory to produce invisible ink for the Culper spy ring, the network of agents operating in British-occupied New York, who provided intelligence crucial to the Continental Army's success. The invisible ink formula, created by chemist James J., allowed Washington's spies to send messages hidden within innocent-looking letters about family matters and business transactions, messages that could only be read when treated with a counterpart chemical that reacted with the ink to make it visible. The British never suspected that letters discussing grain prices and family health contained detailed reports of British troop movements and battle plans. World War I transformed invisible ink from occasional espionage tool into an industrial-scale weapon in the intelligence war between nations. The Germans led the way in developing sophisticated chemical formulas that could not be detected by the simple heat treatment or iodine vapor that revealed traditional invisible inks based on lemon juice or milk. German agents were equipped with invisible inks made from silver compounds, like protargol and argyrol, substances normally used as medicines, but which had the property of being nearly invisible when diluted and applied to paper, yet could be revealed by trained chemists using specialized detection methods. The British and French responded by establishing censorship laboratories, staffed with chemists whose sole job was to examine every piece of mail crossing borders, looking for signs of secret writing. British physicist Thomas Ralph Merton used spectroscopy to detect minute amounts of silver from German invisible inks that had been absorbed into clothing, socks, and shoelaces carried by suspected spies, demonstrating that even the most sophisticated chemical concealment could be defeated by equally sophisticated detection methods. In France, forensic chemist Gaston Edmond Bayle became known as the Grand Inquisitor for his skill in detecting invisible ink messages, using techniques like electrolysis to reveal writing that appeared completely invisible to the naked eye. The cat-and-mouse game between invisible ink makers and invisible ink detectors became so intense that both sides employed full-time chemists who did nothing but try to stay one step ahead of their counterparts. The famous case of the lemon juice spies demonstrated both the power and the limitations of invisible ink technology. 5 German agents operating in Britain during World War I used lemon juice as their invisible ink because it was easily obtained and left no suspicious residue on paper. The messages could be revealed by gentle heating, making communication simple and secure. But British counterintelligence discovered the technique and began systematically heating suspicious letters, revealing the hidden messages. All 5 German spies were caught and executed in the Tower of London, their lemon juice formula proving too simple to withstand professional scrutiny. By World War II, invisible ink had evolved into a science requiring university-level chemistry knowledge to create inks that could survive increasingly sophisticated detection methods. The British Special Operations Executive developed a list of requirements for the ideal invisible ink that revealed how complex the technology had become. The ink had to mix well with water so agents could prepare it quickly in the field. It could not have any distinctive odour that might alert postal sensors to its presence. It must not deposit visible crystals on paper that would show up in glancing light. It had to be invisible under ultraviolet examination because the Germans had begun using UV lamps to screen mail for fluorescent compounds. It must not decompose or discolour the paper in ways that silver nitrate or other common invisible inks did. It should not react with iodine or any other commonly used developers, making it resistant to standard detection techniques. Most importantly, it needed to be made from substances that an agent could plausibly possess without arousing suspicion if searched. The Germans developed particularly sophisticated invisible ink formulas during World War II, including one based on phenolphthalein, a chemical compound extracted from laxative pills. An agent could carry laxative pills through border checkpoints without suspicion, then extract the phenolphthalein to create an invisible ink that remained colourless until exposed to an alkaline developer like ammonia or bicarbonate of soda. The British countered by developing detection papers that would change colour when contacted by any form of secret writing, whether liquid or solid. American sensors examining mail from prisoners of war discovered that German POWs were receiving packages containing small amounts of putty-like material, about the size of a match head, hidden in various places. Testing revealed this was dry ink that could be dissolved in water and used for secret writing. The government printing office responded by developing special stationery coated with chemicals sensitive to both liquid and dry invisible inks, cutting off this communication channel and preventing potentially valuable intelligence from reaching German military authorities. When Juan Pujol Garcia received his bottle of invisible ink from the Abwehr in October 1941, he possessed a formula that represented the cutting edge of German invisible ink technology. The Germans had spent years perfecting inks that could not be detected by Allied censorship laboratories, using rare chemical compounds that required specialized developers to reveal. Pujol's instructions were simple in theory, but complex in practice. He would write an innocent cover letter in normal ink, discussing mundane topics like family health or business matters, then use the invisible ink to write his actual intelligence report in the spaces between the lines of visible text or in the margins of the paper. The German handlers in Madrid would receive his letters at a post office box in Lisbon, treat them with the appropriate chemical developer, and read the hidden intelligence reports that Pujol claimed to be gathering from his network of agents across Britain. The brilliance of the system lay in its simplicity and deniability. If postal censors intercepted a letter, they would see only an innocent message about everyday concerns. Even if they suspected secret writing and tested the letter, the sophisticated German formula would resist common detection methods. Only if they knew the specific developer chemical would the hidden message appear. But there was one significant problem with Pujol's invisible ink operation. He was not in Britain gathering intelligence as the Germans believed. He was sitting in Portugal, making up elaborate reports based on information gleaned from the public library and tourist guides. His invisible ink messages contained detailed descriptions of British military activities that existed only in his imagination, wrapped in a cover story so convincing that German intelligence accepted every word as fact. The British became aware of Pujol's existence in the spring of 1942 through one of the most valuable intelligence breakthroughs of the war. Codebreakers at Bletchley Park had cracked the German Enigma cipher system, allowing them to read encrypted German military communications. When they intercepted messages from Madrid discussing valuable intelligence reports from an agent in London, the British realised something was wrong because MI5 knew with absolute certainty that they had captured or turned every German spy in Britain through the double-cross system. The mysterious agent could not be operating without their knowledge, which meant someone was running an independent operation. When MI6 officer Desmond Bristow interviewed Pujol in Lisbon and heard his story, understanding dawned. Here was a man the Germans trusted implicitly, who had established his credentials through months of successful invisible ink communications, who had built a fictional network the Germans believed was real, and who was offering to work for the British as a double agent. The British moved quickly to bring Pujol to London, pairing him with MI5 officer Thomas Harris, who spoke fluent Spanish and understood the art of deception. Together they would transform Pujol's invisible ink communications into the cornerstone of the greatest military deception in history. The transition from solo operator to British-controlled double agent changed everything about Pujol's invisible ink operations. Instead of improvising reports based on guesswork and library research, Pujol now had access to genuine military information, carefully selected by British intelligence to support their deception plans. The invisible ink messages became more sophisticated, more detailed, and infinitely more dangerous to German military planning. Harris and Pujol expanded the fictional network from a handful of imaginary agents to 27 fully developed characters, each with detailed backstories and specific access to different types of intelligence. They needed different methods of communication for this expanding network, and invisible ink became the primary channel. The mechanics of Pujol's invisible ink operations under British control reveal the extraordinary attention to detail that made the deception successful. Pujol and Harris would spend hours crafting each letter, beginning with an innocent cover message written in ordinary ink that discussed personal matters, complained about wartime shortages, or shared family news. These cover letters were deliberately verbose and filled with trivial details because Pujol's established character was a fanatically talkative Nazi sympathizer who never used one word when 10 would do. Hidden within these innocent letters, written in invisible ink between the lines and in the margins, were intelligence reports supposedly gathered by Pujol's network of 27 agents scattered across Britain. The invisible ink portions contained military information that appeared valuable, but was actually carefully calculated to support British deception objectives. Some information was completely accurate but trivial, such as reports of convoy movements that the Germans could verify through other sources, building credibility. Some information was accurate but deliberately delayed, arriving too late to be useful, demonstrating that Pujol had access to genuine secrets while preventing the Germans from acting on the intelligence. And some information was complete fiction, designed to lead German military planners toward catastrophically wrong conclusions. The letters were written in English, which the Germans believed Pujol's agents spoke fluently, using handwriting that matched the personality of each fictional agent. The physical process of applying invisible ink required precision and patience. The paper had to be perfectly clean and dry before writing began. The invisible ink had to be applied with a fine brush or pen in strokes thin enough to be invisible, but dark enough to appear when developed. The writing had to avoid overlapping with the visible cover text, which would create telltale distortions that trained sensors might detect. After the invisible ink dried completely, the visible cover letter would be written over it, creating a layered document that appeared innocent but contained hidden secrets. As preparations for D-Day intensified in early 1944, invisible ink became the primary weapon in the most crucial deception campaign of the war. Operation Fortitude required convincing the Germans that the Allied invasion would strike at the Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy, and that even after landings occurred in Normandy, these would be merely diversionary attacks preceding the main assault across the Strait of Dover. The invisible ink messages from Pujol's network of imaginary agents provided the human intelligence that German commanders found most convincing because it came from sources they had trusted for years. The letters described observations that supported the existence of the 1st United States Army Group, the fictional force supposedly assembling in southeastern England under General Patton's command. Agent 4, the fictional waiter in a military canteen, sent invisible ink reports about conversations he overheard between American officers discussing the assault on Calais. Agent 7, the imaginary Welsh nationalist soldier, wrote secret messages about Canadian divisions gathering in Scotland for operations in Norway, drawing German attention away from the actual invasion preparations. The invisible ink communications from Pujol's network were so detailed and so consistent with information from other British-controlled double agents that German intelligence analysts accepted them as definitive proof that Pas-de-Calais was the target. The physical evidence of dummy tanks and inflatable landing craft that reconnaissance aircraft photographed in Kent was convincing, and the radio traffic simulating an entire army group preparing for battle was impressive, but the invisible ink messages from human sources the Germans trusted proved decisive in selling the deception. The critical moment came in the days immediately before and after the D-Day landings, when Pujol's invisible ink communications would either cement his credibility or expose him as a fraud. On June 5, 1944, as Allied invasion forces crossed the Channel toward Normandy, Pujol sent an urgent message requesting immediate radio contact to pass critical intelligence. When German radio operators failed to be at their posts at the appointed time, the message warning about the Normandy landings arrived too late to affect the battle. This apparent German incompetence worked perfectly for British plans, because it allowed Pujol to warn about the invasion with accurate information drawn from his spy network, while the warning arrived too late for the Germans to respond. The Germans received proof that Pujol had access to genuine secrets about Allied invasion plans, but through their own failure rather than any British deception, they could not act on the intelligence in time. 3 days after D-Day, on June 9th, Pujol sent the most important invisible ink message of his entire career. The letter ran to thousands of words, carefully composed by Pujol and Harris over many hours, arguing that the Normandy landings were exactly what Operation Fortitude had claimed they would be, a diversionary attack designed to draw German reserves away from Pas-de-Calais. The invisible ink sections of this letter contained detailed intelligence supposedly gathered from all 27 agents in Pujol's network, each reporting on different aspects of the military situation that all pointed to the same conclusion. Units of Patton's army group had not participated in the Normandy assault. Massive forces remained in southeastern England. Landing craft were still concentrated in Dover and the surrounding harbours. All evidence suggested the main invasion was yet to come. The chemistry of the invisible ink Pujol used for this crucial message was the same formula the Germans had provided 3 years earlier, a formula so sophisticated that British censorship laboratories could not detect it without knowing the specific developer chemical. This ensured that if the Germans suspected deception and had the letter analysed by their own chemists, they would find genuine German invisible ink applied according to proper tradecraft. Every technical detail supported the authenticity of the message, while the content of the message supported the greatest lie of the war. Hitler and his senior commanders read the intelligence derived from Pujol's invisible ink communications and made the decision that would doom German hopes of defeating the invasion. They kept powerful panzer divisions in the Pas-de-Calais area, waiting for the main attack that Pujol's invisible ink messages convinced them was coming. For 7 weeks, German reserves that could have crushed the Normandy beachhead remained in position near Calais, held there by the invisible ink communications from a Spanish chicken farmer who had turned German espionage technology against its creators. The fate of D-Day, and possibly the entire war in Europe, was changed by chemicals on paper, by messages hidden in the spaces between innocent words, by the science of invisible ink, weaponized through imagination and deception. When British and American forces finally broke out of Normandy and began racing across France, the Germans conducted an investigation, trying to understand how their intelligence could have been so catastrophically wrong. They examined the invisible ink messages from their network in Britain and found them technically flawless, written with proper German formulas, delivered through established channels, confirmed by multiple independent sources. The broader story of invisible ink's role in World War II extends beyond Pujol's spectacular deception to encompass countless other operations where secret writing proved crucial to Allied success. British Special Operations executive agents operating behind enemy lines in occupied Europe carried invisible ink as a backup communication method when radio transmission was too dangerous or when their radio sets were captured. The formulas SOE supplied to its agents were specifically designed to be prepared from common household chemicals that an agent could obtain without arousing suspicion, ensuring that even if separated from their supply of invisible ink, agents could improvise using ingredients like laundry detergent or phenolphthalein extracted from laxative pills. American intelligence services developed their own invisible ink formulas and supplied them to agents operating in Europe and Asia, creating an invisible communication network that paralleled the visible war. The Germans never stopped using invisible ink throughout the war, despite knowing that the Allies had sophisticated detection capabilities, because properly used invisible ink remained the most secure method of communicating intelligence that could not be intercepted by radio direction finding or broken through cryptanalysis. The technological race between invisible ink makers and invisible ink detectors continued at an accelerating pace throughout the war years. British censorship laboratories in Bermuda employed teams of women who examined thousands of letters daily, looking for signs of secret writing, using ultraviolet lamps, heat treatments, and chemical developers. They became so skilled at detecting invisible ink that they could spot telltale signs, like paper that felt slightly different where invisible ink had been applied, or subtle distortions in visible writing that suggested another layer of text beneath. The transition from invisible ink to modern digital steganography represents the natural evolution of the same principle that ancient Greeks understood, that messages can be hidden in plain sight if the technology for concealment stays ahead of the technology for detection. Today's intelligence agencies hide messages in the digital noise of internet communications, using mathematical algorithms instead of chemical formulas to make information invisible to those without the proper key to reveal it. But the fundamental concept remains unchanged from the day Juan Pujol sat in his Lisbon hotel room with a bottle of German invisible ink, understanding that the ability to communicate secretly, while appearing to communicate openly, provides leverage that can change the course of history. The lessons learned from World War II invisible ink operations influenced how intelligence agencies approached covert communications for generations. The recognition that invisible ink messages must be technically perfect to avoid detection led to the development of specialized training programs for agents who would use secret writing in the field. The understanding that even the most sophisticated invisible ink could be defeated by equally sophisticated detection methods meant that intelligence agencies had to constantly innovate, developing new formulas faster than enemy counterintelligence could develop new detection techniques. The principle that invisible ink worked best when combined with other forms of deception, as Pujol did, by embedding his secret messages within innocent cover letters from an elaborate fictional network, became standard doctrine for covert communication operations. The story of Juan Pujol's invisible ink communications demonstrates a truth about warfare that military planners sometimes forget. The most powerful weapons are not always the largest or most destructive. Sometimes a bottle of chemical solution, in the hands of an imaginative man, can accomplish more than divisions of tanks or fleets of bombers. The invisible ink messages that Pujol sent to German intelligence did not destroy German military capabilities directly. They did not blow up factories, or sink ships, or shoot down aircraft. Instead, they attacked something more fundamental than physical capabilities. They attacked German understanding of reality, creating a false picture of Allied intentions so convincing that German commanders made strategic decisions based on fiction presented as fact. When Hitler ordered his reserves to remain at Pas-de-Calais rather than reinforce Normandy, he was responding to invisible ink messages from sources he trusted, never knowing that chemistry had been turned into a weapon more devastating than anything in his arsenal. The technical sophistication of World War II invisible ink represented the peak of chemical secret writing before digital encryption made it obsolete. The formulas were complex enough to require university-level chemistry knowledge to prepare properly. The detection methods were equally sophisticated, requiring laboratory equipment and trained chemists to identify secret writing. The cat-and-mouse game between concealment and detection had reached a level where both sides employed full-time scientists who did nothing but try to stay ahead of their opponents in the invisible ink arms race. But all the sophisticated chemistry in the world could not protect against the fundamental vulnerability of any intelligence system, the possibility that your most trusted sources are working for the enemy. The Germans gave Pujol their most advanced invisible ink formulas, taught him proper tradecraft for secret writing, and provided him with everything he needed to communicate securely with their intelligence services. They did everything right from a technical standpoint. The invisible ink was undetectable by Allied censorship laboratories, the communication channels were secure, the tradecraft was flawless. And yet every message Pujol sent using their invisible ink technology was working against German interests, because the human element, the agent writing the messages, was not what German intelligence believed him to be. This lesson echoes through intelligence history. Technology can secure communications, but it cannot secure loyalty. Chemistry can make messages invisible, but it cannot make lies into truth. The invisible ink that the Abwehr provided to Pujol was exactly what they believed it to be, a sophisticated chemical formula that could hide messages from enemy detection. But the messages hidden by that chemistry were not the intelligence reports the Germans thought they were receiving. They were weapons aimed at the heart of German military planning, dressed in chemistry and delivered through channels the Germans had created themselves. The fate of D-Day was not determined on the beaches of Normandy alone. It was influenced by decisions made in German headquarters, based on intelligence that arrived through invisible ink communications from sources German commanders trusted. When historians calculate the factors that contributed to Allied victory in the Normandy campaign, they list superior air power, naval support, and the courage of assault troops. But they should also include chemistry, the science of making messages invisible, and the art of making lies believable when revealed. Juan Pujol's bottle of invisible ink, provided by German intelligence in October 1941, became one of the most consequential weapons of World War II, not because of the chemistry it contained, but because of how that chemistry was used to turn German intelligence systems against themselves. The invisible ink that was supposed to protect German interests became the vehicle for their deception. The technology meant to give Germany advantages in the intelligence war provided the British with channels to manipulate German military thinking, and the science that made messages disappear from paper proved less important than the imagination that created messages capable of changing history. This is how invisible ink changed the fate of D-Day, not through chemistry alone, but through chemistry combined with human creativity, deception, and the understanding that in warfare, perception often matters more than reality, and the side that controls what the enemy believes can sometimes accomplish more than the side that controls what the enemy sees.